What's up, party people? Another edition of the What's Your Why podcast here. This week we have Wes Plate. He is a ultra runner, a videographer, and an all-around cool dude. I was super stoked to have him on because it was kind of a fanboy moment for me to have him on the podcast. He has been somebody I've been following as long as I've been into the ultra marathon world. I've been interested in that kind of scope of athletics. He goes to the extreme. He does the 200-mile races and documents them as he goes along. So not only is he running, he's also documenting, creating really cool YouTube videos that kind of detail his way through the races, and does a good job of putting the viewer as much as possible in the shoes of the racer. It was really cool to see the videos, but then also it's very exciting to hear about it kind of face to face. Obviously, we did this over Zoom, which is kind of unfortunate, but it was still an awesome podcast to record. And I really appreciate Wes coming on. So you guys, I hope you enjoy. I hope you come back for more and tune in next week for another episode. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Perfect.
Hi, Ty. Nice to meet you. I'm Wes.
I'm Ty. Nice to meet you as well.
Where are you existing in this world?
Fargo, North Dakota.
Oh, wow. Never been
Yeah. Not a lot of people have. It's a
there.
pretty remote part of the country. It's a big city, relatively speaking, but North Dakota is not the most visited place in the world.
No, I've been to South Dakota a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one time we were driving east and the default route we were following said go through North Dakota. And then we talked to somebody and they're like, don't bother. Just go through South Dakota. It's way better.
Yeah.
So we at that particular trip we like intentionally avoided North Dakota, which bit of a bummer because I should go someday.
Yeah, the western part of the state is gorgeous. So, and that's not where I live. So I live
Oh, okay.
on the far right side on the border of Minnesota.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but if you on the far western side, there's some beautiful. It's called the Badlands. It's like Teddy Roosevelt National Park. It's a gorgeous place. Whereabouts are you looking?
I'm a little bit north of Seattle, so I'm in the
Okay,
upper left corner.
gotcha. It's probably a lot more beautiful there. I believe it.
It can be. It is
Yeah.
this during this time of the year. It's pretty spectacular here. We have
Is
terrible
it
winters.
okay? What's the winters look like? Is it a lot of rain or a lot of snow?
No, more in the rain. But while it rains a lot, what's the worst part about the winters here is that they're gray and dreary.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a lot of us have seasonal affective disorder where we just sort of don't have enough light coming at us. The gray darkness just wears after a while. So,
Mm-hmm. I feel
but in the
that.
summertime, it's like we get the terrible winter and then make up for it. We get an amazing summer. So
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty good.
No, that has to be pretty nice. We get to see like that the gray in the late fall and the early spring, but like the middle of the winter, it's so cold that there's no clouds a lot of times,
Oh,
and
okay.
so it'll be -40, but just a clear blue sky.
But sunny. See, I can handle that.
Yeah,
I can handle
and
that more than 40 degrees above zero in rain
mm-hmm.
and dreary gray.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know
Yeah.
I guess it's a horse apiece, however you
Yeah,
want to
that's
look at
right.
it. But
Absolutely.
um, I guess we can kind of get started. I do
Sure.
appreciate you coming on here. I guess we already did start, but ultimately, like I can give you kind of like a lowdown. I give you a little bit of a lowdown on what the podcast is about, but it's kind of like why people do what they do. They kind of a lot of people I like to interview have like seem to have a purpose to them and like a drive for like the goals they chase and like the projects they go after. And Wes, it just seemed like that you take on these huge projects, whether it's creating the videos for your races or just running the races themselves as a project for yourself. Um, but we'll get to that ultimately. I want people to like kind of know who you are. So where are you from, the Seattle area, or where did you grow up?
I pretty much grew up in the Seattle area. I was born in Texas and then lived in Colorado when I was young. When I was in third grade, my family moved to the state of Washington, and I've lived here most of my life since then. Uh, I really like the Pacific Northwest. It's a nice place to be in the summertime. There's a lot of great trails and mountains, and if you like ocean and mountains, it's all fairly close by. So I do like it here. The winter's gonna get me down after a while, but yeah, I pretty much lived here most of my life, and yeah, it's not a bad place to be.
Yeah, I can imagine. Are you a coffee nerd at all? So like, I don't know,
I'm not
Starbucks.
a coffee nerd. No, I
No,
drink a lot of coffee, but I do it purely for the practicality of getting
gotcha,
caffeine into my system. I don't really
gotcha,
care. Don't care too much for what I'm drinking.
gotcha. I guess it's just the tourists. You would love to go to like the OG Starbucks location, but
Yeah, that's right.
um, no, the growing up near the mountains had to be a pretty awesome experience. Um, and you'd mentioned trails. So when you were younger, were you into trail running and being outside and whatnot?
No, that was something that came into my life much later. When I was young, when I was a child growing up, my family would go on a lot of hikes. And maybe it was just one of those sorts of things where because I was a kid and my parents were making me do it, I decided I hated it. And so there was a long time where I wasn't interested in being outside and being on trails.
Mm-hmm.
We had done that a lot when I was a kid. It wasn't until much later in life that I started to kind of get more active. And so, yeah, really, I don't think I fell in love with the trails until I was in my 40s. So it's
Okay.
quite a long time later.
Yeah. No, that is a while later. Um, growing up near the outdoors though, were you a fan of the outdoors, or was that kind of all kind of pushed to the side since it was forced by your family?
Probably in a way, it was all pushed to the side. I mean, I don't know, I enjoy looking at the mountains. I enjoyed road trips. But the idea of backpacking or going for a long hike wasn't necessarily something that inspired me. When I started to develop my own ideas for what I wanted to do with my life.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. It's weird because you think of my father was a phy ed teacher, and sometimes like when like a student misbehaves, you force a kid to do push-ups or something like that, and it becomes something that is looked at as punishment instead of like I do push-ups for fun. And so it can really shift a kid's mindset growing up to kind of be forced to do something. Kind of interesting how something that I'm sure you love now was something that you kind of despised back when you were younger. Um, were you into athletics growing up though?
I did have a little bit of an athletic side to me when I was younger. When I was in, I guess when I was in junior high, middle school age, I started to run track, and I was a sprinter. I was not necessarily the fastest, but I enjoyed it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I did that through actually all the way through high school. I was on the track team. When I was in high school, I was actually I got better. I was still a sprinter, and one of my race that my coach liked to have me in was the quarter mile. So one time around the track.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember that being a pretty tough race because you're pretty much flat out the whole time, and that was a really tough challenge for me. I enjoyed the sort of the feeling that being an athlete in high school gave me because I was, in good shape, and I liked just like the way that my body fit. And then when I got to college, that sort of changed a bit because it was more difficult to get out and run. My priorities started to change. Beer was a whole lot more accessible to me, and so as the amount of beer I brought into my body increased, the amount of time I spent exercising decreased, which just created a spiral because I got
Mm-hmm.
heavier and heavier, which made it more difficult to run. So not too long into my early 20s, I just wasn't really running anymore and had really changed quite a bit physically from when I
Mm-hmm.
was an athlete in high school. But I did have a bit of something that started within me when I was young that I remembered a good feeling. So even as I got unhealthy, more and more unhealthy as I got into deeper into my adult life, I always did have this memory in the back of my mind of, oh, but remember when you were fit, how good that felt? So eventually I got back to that, but there was a long time where I'd had a sort of a life detour.
I think anybody who runs feels or just exercises in general feels the kind of positive endorphins afterwards. When you thought back to running, could you also think of that, or is it just more of the idea of being fit?
No, it was the idea of running. I remembered enjoying running. What's interesting is my mom was a marathon runner when I was perhaps in like third, fourth grade, that time frame in my life. And she ran two different marathons. I can remember as a child going to cheer her on as she would run past us. Um, and then after she did those couple of marathons, then she sort of stopped running. That was just sort of a phase of her life. But I think something about that planted seeds that grew later. I can remember my mom telling me something like when she started to run, her training regime when she very first started was to like walk from one telephone pole to the next telephone pole and then run to the next telephone pole and then walk and just basically alternate run and walking based on the distance between telephone poles. And then over time, she would increase it so that she would run two telephone poles, walk one telephone pole. And that was the kind of thing that when I was in college and a little bit later, there would be times where I'd be like, "Oh man, I remember that. I remember how much fun running could have been or was at some certain times." And so I would go out and I would walk and run telephone poles because that's what my mom taught me to do. And it didn't always stick, so I would do that for a little while, and then life would sort of catch up
Mhm.
with me again. And but that was it was there was something there that the feeling of running. My mom used to also talk about running, the runner's high, and that was something that stuck with me. Like, what is the runner's high, and how can I
Mhm.
get it? And I don't think when I was young I ever necessarily felt a runner's high. At least I don't remember it, but I did still have lots of good associations with running itself, not just
Mhm.
athletics in general. So I think that those good feelings, like I said, they were seeds that eventually sprouted. It just took a long time.
I have a very similar seed was planted in my mind when I was young. I believe my mom ran about 8 marathons growing up, um, and we always went to go cheer her on. And I remember one year I ran 7 miles with her, and I was just completely out of the blue. She got dragged way to the back because I was super slow. I believe I was like 8 or like 7. Didn't train for it at all or anything like that. But I did remember I felt great afterwards, but also I felt very slow. And so that kind of like pushed me away from distance running. I never distance ran until after I graduated high school. And I did track and whatnot. I did the 400. I actually really liked the 400. But we have these crazy experiences of cheering our family members on at marathons. And like one year, my grandma dressed up in a chicken costume, like a full mascot chicken costume, and played. She's really good at playing the accordion, and so she played the accordion for the Twin Cities marathon runners.
That's
And
amazing. I
it's
love that.
a crazy memory, but definitely something about that was planted in my mind. And we like the company I worked for, we help volunteer at the local marathon here, so it's funny how it probably has to do something that's there's so much positive energy you experience being at a marathon. My first half was done. It was super cold, not super cold for us at least. It was 40 degrees, rain and wind. So kind of what you would expect in a North Dakota spring. But still there's people out there cheering. It was so much fun. And it just brought a lot of joy. I could definitely see like it's funny you just said like the seed is planted. I've said it many times that people are like, why do you run? It's like, oh, I think the seed is planted from my mom when I was younger. But
Yeah, I believe it.
so you said you kind of fell apart fell away from running going into college. What did you go to school for? Or what was your kind of like goals for going into school?
Yes, at that time of life, I was really interested in video production, and went to school and studied. I had got a communications degree. I went to a broadcasting specific college. Basically, I went to school with the idea that I was going to end up working at a TV station, as a camera person, or I didn't necessarily know. I just knew that I wanted to be involved in making TV, um, maybe Hollywood or films, but I kind of went the path of instead of going to film school, I went to broadcasting school. So that's kind of what I intended to do when I went off to college, and I had created a lot of experience for myself, even though I this was a long time ago. So I graduated from high school in 1991, and so in the mid 90s I was in college, and the idea of shooting a video and editing a video and sharing that video was a lot of work. It was all videotape based, no files on cards or anything. It was very manual. But I was able to teach myself even before I went to college. I had access to a video editing system at my dad's work. And basically I was offered the opportunity to, if I wanted to learn how to use it, they would let me make videos, for myself. And so when I was in high school, I was on the cross country team, and I would, at the end of the season, I would collect the videotapes that the coaches had shot of various races and stuff. And these would be VHS tapes, so very large video cassettes. And
Mhm.
at the end of the season, I made like a season compilation video, all set to music. It was, for, I think at the time, considering I was like 15 years old or something, was pretty sophisticated. All these various clips being edited to music, and then I would show that video at the end, the season ender banquet, and
Mhm.
um, I can remember actually there was one of the things that really inspired me to go into video production was I guess it was my sophomore year of high school. I made this video for the banquet, and that particular year the team didn't do very well when they went to state. So at the end of the state cross country meet, all the varsity runners were all sad and dejected because they didn't win like they wanted to. So when I edited together the summary of the season, I had all these shots of the dejected runners, and so I played some sad music behind it. And when I played that at the banquet, so many people in the room were crying at that point of the video. It really got to them. And so I was standing in the back of the room watching this, and I just remember feeling really like, oh, I found my calling to make videos somehow, and to help, because I didn't realize how much emotion I could transmit to the audience.
Mhm.
So anyway, it's kind of funny. I hadn't thought about that in a long time, about how um, even when I was 15 years old, I was making running videos. Here I am, whatever, 35 years later, and I'm still
Yeah.
doing it.
When you I never like you started talking about videos. I didn't put together how much harder it would have been back then.
Oh yeah.
Also how much different the quality must have been. But back then that had to be a pretty new age idea. Um, to be making videos. Was it like accepted by like your friends and family to go into that line of work?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There was, I always had when I had our family gatherings, I would always have a video camera out recording it. And that started from my grandparents had an anniversary party. Everyone from the family flew in. It was a huge, big deal. And they rented a VHS camera to be used at this event. Back at the time, these cameras were so expensive and nobody had them. So they rented a camera, and they asked me if I would be the person who would like record the thing. So I learned how to run around the camera and just really enjoyed shooting with this big camera on my shoulder. And so I think my family pretty quickly saw like, oh, he really likes this. And then of course,
Hmm.
once I started learning how I could edit video as well, they were really supportive of that, because I think they could see that there was some sort of skills and talents that really appealed to me.
Hmm.
So yeah.
That's awesome. I think it's cool to hear about when people had this like passion when they're really young, or maybe not passion. It's an overused word, I think, a lot of times, but like something, maybe a calling, and especially since you experienced it like your sophomore year at that banquet, like what you could actually do with video. It'd be interesting to see like what you could do with today's technology
Oh
for
yeah.
them back in the day. But yeah, obviously you can't go back in time. When like moving into your college career, what was it like starting to dive deeper into schooling, but also falling away from running? Did like was your you were very passionate about this? I guess I'm gonna keep using the word, but you're very passionate about um video. Did it did that stay throughout college?
Yeah, it did. I was pretty busy when I was in college. While there were certainly times where I was having a good time and letting loose and being irresponsible, I was also trying really hard to make money to help pay for college. I worked mostly full time most of the time I was in school. I often had multiple jobs. So I was always working at some job, doing something, trying to make some money. And I actually ended up having a couple different jobs, at least two different jobs on campus that were video related. I got a job at the local TV station, just doing whatever they would let me do. And over time, I got more responsibilities and was actually creating content at some level that was going out on the air every day. I've also worked on the crew that broadcast local, mostly college sporting events. So if our university was having a baseball game, they would get broadcast, and the crew that was doing that broadcasting was mostly students. And so I was able to get a lot of real world video production experience through my college years. Even while some of my peers who I was going to school with, they may have been focused more on schoolwork, or I was focused more on like the job. Like I was thinking,
Hmm.
this job that I'm doing is giving me way more video experience than the classes are giving me. But Yeah, I was able to maintain that real drive to make video all through school.
Hmm.
And even when I left, when I graduated, I had an idea of continuing on and pursuing that career, which is what I did.
Um, just because I'm a nerd for education. That's kind of what I've studied throughout my life is education. What and in my mind, if I'm thinking about how um, some type of video schooling would be done nowadays, there'd be a lot of hands-on and a lot of like actually recording because the technology is so readily available now. Everybody has like a professional camera in their pocket now. Um, what was it like back then for like your schoolwork? Were you recording a lot of stuff? Or gaining that experience in the classroom and in your program?
We did have access to equipment to produce video once we got into, third year classes and fourth year classes. But it was we the time that we were given access to the equipment was quite budgeted because we were quite limited on the access that we had. There were a number of cameras that you could, check out and go shoot something, but you had to bring it back.
Hmm.
We didn't have the concept of every single person having a camera of their own.
Hmm.
Um, and so I can remember there was a lot of classes that were just a lot of theory, a lot of reading books, talking about concepts of shooting and editing, because there are a lot of rules to doing it, the right way, as we used to say.
Hmm.
Um, so we did a lot of theory, but then there would be periodically there would be like a group project or something where we would work together on making something.
Hmm.
But it probably would. I would say that a class today would probably have more hands-on opportunities. Plus, if you were in school today, you have no excuse but to be making video at all times.
Yeah.
It's practically free to make film, at the highest quality with the tools you have available now. So, um, I think we had it a lot easier than those who preceded us. We actually had videotape, thankfully, whereas of course lots of other people before us had film to deal with, and that's a whole other technological barrier to getting
Hmm.
into this. So, um, But I had a good time, and I am still in touch with a few people that I went to college with. So it's kind of fun to see how those of us who stayed in the video space in one way or another, it's kind of fun to see where they've ended up.
Mhm. Um, so you gained quite a bit of like work experience throughout college. Did you see that like directly relating to um you being able to succeed when you actually got to your career out of college?
Yeah, I believed that the work I was doing in college to help improve, or the professional work I was doing, not necessarily the school work, but like
Hmm.
the work I was doing, I saw that being very important for helping me get some kind of work when I left. Um, there were specific pieces of technology that I had access to, certain kind of videotape machines. We It's really hard to try to explain maybe to someone who doesn't understand what video, even what a videotape is. But if you think about like a VHS tape, I think most people can see that
Hmm.
it's a plastic it's a plastic box that has reels of videotape inside of it. Well,
Hmm.
that same form factor in a way exists in the professional world, but just with different technology, bigger cassettes.
Hmm.
But there's also I this is just how dated. Maybe some of your older listeners will know what I'm talking about. But we also had these videotape machines that were reel to reel, where you would like almost like a 16 millimeter film projector. You would have a reel of videotape that you would put up on a machine, spool it through all these gears and various pieces of machinery to a take up reel that would pull on the other side. And this particular kind of technology was very high end. It was very broadcast quality. I mean, like TV stations would have this kind of stuff, and you couldn't get any higher quality than that. And because it was so expensive, very few people would have access to touching that technology. But at my TV station job, one of my roles was to use these machines that produce the stuff I was creating for on air. And I saw that particular piece of experience as being key to my future in going forward, because I would graduate from college and I'd be able to put on my resume, I worked at this TV station and I was a 1 inch videotape editor, and that was going to mean something to somebody important
Hmm.
and would open a door that other students wouldn't have access to because their resume didn't have that key
Hmm.
that key tag on it. So yeah, I did see that experience as being very important. So that was one of the reasons why I worked so hard, because I really wanted to succeed when I was older or when I got out of school. And I've always been very driven, I think, that way, just
Hmm.
to work really hard, um, because
I guess
it's
that's kind of what I
yeah.
was going for was not as much of the experience and the skills you learned, but um the ability to work hard
Yeah.
on top, like because you can go to school and people will like be proud of you. You get 4.0, you do your classwork, and that can be, some people think that's a lot. But then there's people out there who are going to school full time, working two jobs. It's a whole different story, and both are looked at as good things, especially if you're maintaining your classwork with the two jobs. Um, and so that's kind of was more or less looking at was, and now that you say it, you say you're kind of always driven like that to succeed. Was that something that was maybe instilled by your family growing up, or has was that your more of that's yourself?
I think that it was definitely something that was instilled in me by my parents growing up, especially my dad. Um, I don't necessarily know. I don't have a story I could tell you with
Hmm.
that one time that he told me the thing that for
Hmm.
ever since then I've worked so hard. But um, it's something about growing up. My dad really inspired in me the concept of hard work and working for it.
Hmm.
And that go apart. Maybe one thing that he did that was concrete towards that was he made me pay for half of my college experience.
Hmm.
So he paid for half, and it was up to me to come up with the other half. Now, when I went to college, it was a lot more affordable than it is today. So it was, even though it took a lot of work, it was doable. So
Hmm.
it sort of set me on a little bit of a path towards learning how to manage my time, juggle lots of different opportunities, and juggle lots of jobs,
Yeah.
and make it all work. So yeah.
I think it's such a valuable skill, and I'm only 25, but you can still see people who have a work ethic and how that helps them outside of just being able to learn.
Yeah.
And like, I'm an education guy. I love learning. I love putting your all into school, but I'm also a realist and think that having a very good work ethic is so valuable. Um, moving outside of college, getting into your career, what did it feel like to kind of finally get a position in the field that you've been kind of striving to be in since you were young?
I was really proud of starting my career. I eventually ended up with an editing job in Seattle, and yeah, it was great, man. I was using technology that I loved. I was making cool stuff, working with cool people. Every project, was exciting and interesting. Learned so many different things. Every project, I would learn something new. I was having the time of my life. It was really great. I really did love some of those early times. I mean, it was hard work. I worked really hard.
Mhm.
Sometimes I wasn't happy, but you know, especially looking back, yeah, it was great.
What was that first job looking like for you?
Well, the very first, well, I think I did some freelancing. I had a couple of jobs that were just sort of, I wouldn't say necessarily career focused, but what ended up happening was I ended up meeting uh, a guy who ran a facility where they did editing. Advertising agencies would go to this facility and they would work with the editors who worked there to create TV commercials and various things like that.
Mhm.
And through a fortuitous set of, I happened to meet somebody who introduced me to somebody who introduced me to somebody. I got introduced to a guy at this advertising agency. And so I talked to that guy on the phone, and he told me that I should meet the guy at this editing company. And so I met the guy at the editing company and was just, at the time I was just very eager. What can I do? I'm interested in anything. But I also had some key experience. I mentioned one piece of technological experience that helped me out. When I was a senior in college, I had an opportunity to learn a different new computer-based editing system that was also quite fortuitous. I saw that if I could get experience using that computer, that would change my career. And sure enough,
Mhm.
it did, because later I'm meeting with this guy at this editing company, and I'm like, yeah, in college I learned how to use that computer thing. And so they're like, okay, cool. Well, we could use you at night to come in and load the videotapes into this computer, and we'll just kind of hire you on a freelance basis. It was just one of those wonderful opportunities where I was the right person at the right time, who just happened to meet this person, and luck really played into it. But of course, you have to have the skills or be prepared to meet that luck. So yeah,
Mhm.
I started out being what they called basically a freelance assistant editor, and I loaded videotapes into this machine at night, and then because I had access to the machine, I was able to learn it more and get better skilled. And so it was at the same time I started to get some freelance editing jobs. So I was using that same computer-based editing system, getting more and more experience with it and growing my skills. And so about pretty quickly, actually, like a year later, the company that was hiring me as a freelance assistant at night offered me a full-time job. I think I was 23 years old. I had my first full-time job. And yeah, that was sort of the rocket ship from there for a little while.
Mhm. So we talked a lot about the video part of you, and I think, or part of your life,
Yeah,
getting into it. I would love to hear, and like the reason I kind of found you is because um, well, I originally followed you because I found one of your YouTube videos, probably about, I think it was like year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that.
cool.
I believe it was the Cocodona. I think these are your first time doing it, I believe.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Inaugural
Um,
year of the Cocodona 250,
yeah,
2021.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, no, usually people have something that led them into ultra running. Um, what is it that kind of got you back into running? What gave you that mindset switch to get from being like fully busy and uh, all your time taken up to actually getting the running shoes put back on and getting after it again?
It was a long journey to get back to that place, and the biggest barrier wasn't necessarily my work schedule. My work schedule created a lot of stress. Um, I also was I married yet? I was on my way to getting married, and that was causing a lot of stress. There was just a lot of stress.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I was managing stress at the time was with alcohol. And so my alcohol intake grew and grew and grew. And it was actually my alcohol problem, which also added a lot of weight to my body, made it very difficult for me. Anytime I wanted to try to get back into running, I would eventually fail because I wasn't, well, I didn't really want to stop drinking, but I
Mm-hmm.
also, it was just too difficult and I wasn't ready to make it happen. So it wasn't until, fast forward to 2008, I stopped drinking alcohol. I actually went to a recovery program. I completely cut alcohol out of my life. And when I did that, my weight started to immediately drop without even making any other changes to my lifestyle. So I didn't necessarily start exercising right away, but I cut out a lot of calories from my life when I made that decision. So I started to lose weight, and it wasn't until, well, and that would occasionally spark an interest in, hey, can I run again? Oh no, it's still kind of hard, but it was getting easier and easier. What really started me down the running path was 4 years after that. In 2012, I was much smaller than I was when I was drinking. I was on a new sort of career trajectory where everything was going pretty well. I was
Mm-hmm.
really blessed. Things were less stressful in a way. There was still stress. I was still in a marriage that was stressful. There was still all this stress, but I'd cut alcohol out of my life, and so I was managing things much better. In 2012, a friend of mine showed me his, he was telling me about how he was getting into running. And he showed me he had a watch. It was made by Garmin that would record the run he did, and then he would upload that to Strava, this website that was kind of like Facebook, but you could share your activities. And I watched all this stuff he was telling me about, and something about that was extremely interesting and exciting to me. It felt like a way to really motivate yourself, and almost like, I guess we didn't have the word for it back then, but now we would say to gamify exercise. How can you
Mm-hmm.
turn it into something more than just a slog effort that you have to do to try to get moving? So the fact that I was sort of in a better mindset because I had stopped drinking, because my body was in better shape, because I had lost so much weight, I was finally in a place where I could try out running again. So over the course of 2012, I would just occasionally run here and there. Of course, I started off with telephone poles as
Mm-hmm.
my training method, but eventually I would get to the point where I could run a couple miles, without stopping. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started to do 5Ks, and yeah. So the start of me becoming a runner that has pretty much gone since then was
Mm-hmm.
in I guess 10 years ago now, in 2000, or a little more than 10 years ago, in 2012.
So, like, we'll keep moving forward with running in a
Yeah.
second here, but one of the things I like to talk about is kind of like that work ethic thing, and we already talked about it a little bit. But do you think that kind of coming out of recovery, um, and I've never been through a program like that, so I can only ask and try to empathize, but um, going into a program like that and coming out of it, do you think your skills of kind of being driven, I mean, not your skill, but your mindset of being driven, helped you move forward with your life after that? And continuously lose the weight, continuously stay away from the alcohol?
Uh, well, I would only have to imagine the answer is yes. I think that experience was instrumental. The particular type of recovery that I went to was extremely dramatic and actually traumatic. It was a challenging time, um, and well, it was a controversial program, but it was successful for me. Where while I was in the hospital getting the treatment, after a certain amount of time, maybe after 5 days or something, I can't remember, I I suddenly just felt in my soul almost like, oh wait, no, I don't want alcohol anymore. Like I really felt that the craving had been just completely disabled.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been quite lucky in I feel like in my journey that the entire time, 14 and a half years, I think it's been now,
Mhm.
I've never once had any desire to have alcohol. So some of the potential, you know, requirements for me to like really have this strong will, uh,
Mhm.
that was that was not a problem for me in that particular case. I didn't have
Okay.
to worry about willing myself to stay sober. But I think that the going through a challenging experience, like choosing the recovery path that was the most difficult or perhaps the most dramatic in some ways, I think was an interesting decision that felt right to me. And I
Mhm.
think that also reflects in the way that I sort of generally live my life, where whether I mean to or not, generally I don't even think about it. I tend to do the hardest choice of whatever the thing is. And of course, we'll get to it eventually with the running thing. And I've also now decided on tackling some of the most difficult foot race challenges. So yeah, there is something about probably going back. I could find examples where I never took the easy one.
Mhm.
Everything I do at 110%, and um, yeah.
No, that makes sense. So now you're doing 5Ks, you're doing 10Ks. Have you ran a half marathon or a marathon around the 2012, 2013 time?
In 2014, I was, really enjoying my Strava working out and sharing my activities and the social interconnectedness that brought into my life. And I believe it was September or something like that of 2014, I posted a 7 mile run on Strava. Now, and this was a mistake. I was supposed to run 5 miles that day, but I was in a town I didn't totally understand. I took a wrong turn and I went 7 miles. Now, it's kind of amazing to me. And when I think about that, the ramifications of that wrong turn, because I posted that 7 mile run, my friend Michelle said, "Hey Wes, if you can run 7 miles, you can run a half marathon. Well, would you like to run a half marathon with me in 3 months or whatever it was?" And that was just like I did. All I needed was someone to invite me, so I was like, "Yeah, sure, of course I will. That sounds great." Partly because I had the confidence of having done that 7 mile run, and my friends said I could do it and I could train obviously for it. So I did run my first half marathon in October, something like that. Of anyway, 2014,
Hmm.
and yeah, a lot that definitely kicked off quite a lot. But that first half marathon was terrible. I didn't know anything about what I was doing,
Hmm.
so I didn't eat breakfast that morning. I didn't really drink or eat anything on the course. I mean, road races, there's not a lot of eating anyway, but at least there's
Hmm.
something you could drink.
Yeah.
But because I was so calorie deficient, I remember I think it was mile 11 or 12, one of those two. I totally hit the wall. I bonked. I was struggling. I was in so much pain. But
Hmm.
I pushed through, and then when I finally got to the finish line, the elation I felt of finishing was like this emotional release that I have only felt a couple times since. It was so
Hmm.
exciting for me to finish that first half marathon. And yeah, so that was also quite a gateway to bigger things.
Hmm. No, that's I think a lot of people can have that feeling with their first big race. Um, I definitely felt it for my first half marathon. Train like it was one of those things where I would run 3 or 5 miles, but like doing 20 miles in a month was like, whoa, that's big numbers. And
Yeah.
I probably around the same time you got your Garmin watch, I got a Nike watch back in like 2012. And I just thought it was cool. And I would go bike around there's a golf course where I lived, and I would go bike around that, and but it would count as a run, and I would be like, oh, this is cool. Like, look at this map. So I felt that same map
uh,
feeling. Like, this is
right on. I
really
like
cool.
that.
And then I started in college running some more, and then the half marathon was right at the end of my senior year of college, and it was kind of like the finished student teaching, finished all my curriculum for the year, and then I was coaching track, but two other coaches with us did it. Actually, three. It was just like everybody was around there at the finish line. It was a very cool experience to finish with
Mm,
everybody. But
yeah.
and that's probably like the most joy I've actually felt at a finish line since then.
Hmm.
There hasn't been a lot where I can like truly celebrate because I've snuck into a few half marathons and I'm like, oh no, don't give me a medal. I didn't pay. And then they're like, what? I'm like, who sneaks into a half marathon? People get confused by that one. But no, I definitely feel what you're saying with like the joy of a half marathon. When have you done a full marathon or
I have since.
okay?
It took quite a long time before I ever did a marathon. After I did my first half marathon, I decided that my what I really wanted was to get good at the half marathon, or at least comfortable
Mm-hmm.
with the distance. And so I kind of like consciously made the choice to get good enough at the half marathon distance that I could run a half marathon without having to train for it. Just I
Mm-hmm.
wanted that to be like my base level distance. Um, and so it took me a few years, I guess, to do that. Or yeah, maybe even, well, maybe it took a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Because actually, now that I think about it, it was only, oh no, wow. You're really helping me introspect into the timeline because that's not even true either, because it was less than a year between the time when I did my first half marathon and when I did my first ultra. I did it in a year.
Oh
So
wow.
in that year, I got comfortable at the half marathon distance and pretty quickly decided that I needed more. So I didn't realize that it was such a compressed timeline. That's
It's
hilarious.
funny you say that because I've competed in three ultras, um, two virtual, but I don't really count those ones the same. But I've only finished one of them. But I went from half marathon to ultra. I didn't do a
So did
regular.
I. I did the
Yeah,
same thing. I went
just wild.
a half marathon to 50K, and it wasn't until uh, after I'd even done some, no, maybe I'd done a few 50Ks before I suddenly had an opportunity to do a marathon, and I'm like, oh yeah,
Hmm.
sure. Now I feel confident that I could do a marathon, and I think I've done two. I've done one road marathon and at least one, no, maybe two trail marathons. I
Okay.
haven't done the marathon distance very many times, but only one road marathon, and I honestly felt more beat up after that one road marathon than I've almost felt in any other race I've ever done. The
Really?
pavement just murdered my body. So, but yeah.
I felt so my first 50K was in this past May, and I felt way worse physically after that than and it was a um it's an old train track
Oh, okay.
turned into a gravel bike trail. And so you run straight, you turn, you come back, same route. Um, Beautiful, goes through like kind of some rolling farm hills, but you're still going on one plane.
Yeah.
And I felt more beat up after that than I did um the other two ultras I've competed in were 56-mile races, and I only made it 40 miles both times. But I felt more beat up after the 32 miles than after the 40 miles of on being on like flat gravel. It has to be something with using the exact same muscles the whole time.
I think that's a yeah. That's what was in my brain. I'm thinking, oh, I think it's the repetitive motion that's never
Mm-hmm.
changing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The cramps weren't the same that I had after this last one back at the end of July, but definitely the overall soreness was definitely worse after like the flat. Um,
I think
what
there's
was
also
the?
a thing too that the shorter the distance, the faster you run.
Oh yeah.
And so, there's a lot of really hard running in something like a marathon if you're going for it. Whereas in the ultra distance stuff, especially the longer the ultra
Mm-hmm.
is, the intensity of the running is so much lower. So I think it is a lot of that repetitive motion, always in the same muscle, moving over and over, but also the high intensity. Also, I think really causes
Mhm.
recovery to be slower or can be really painful. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the other guests I had on earlier, his name's Scotty Coomer, and he runs like a running podcast as well. But he is the one who hosted the race I went to in May, um, and he had advice, and it was any advice for every ultra is in the first half, don't be stupid, and in the second half, don't be a bitch. And in my first race, before I had that advice, I was like, "Oh man, I really could have used that because I came out flying. I was in like third place at the halfway point, and then shortly after that, I just went downhill. But it's a live and learn, and still
Mhm.
enjoy the experiences. Do you do you recall like what race was your very first ultra?
Oh, absolutely, I do. My first ultra was the Baker Lake 50K, and that's north of here up in Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
So it's up in the mountains. It's an out and back that kind of skirts along the edge of a lake. So there is some elevation gain, but not a great deal. It's quite a rolling course.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned that when I ran my first half marathon, I didn't know anything at all. I didn't know anything about nutrition, so I didn't fuel before my race. I had figured that out a bit by the October of 2015, but what I hadn't learned about was hydration. So I think I had a vest with bottles, but it was just water, just plain water.
Mm-hmm.
And along the way, they had a water drop, and I replaced my water. So I thought I was doing great. I was drinking all this water. There was an aid station halfway at the halfway point. So about 15 miles in, I get to the aid station, and as I'm standing there talking to the volunteers, all of a sudden my legs start cramping up really bad. My legs hurt so bad, and I'm just because basically I'm like, why am I cramping? And the aid station volunteers were really helpful, and they were like, oh well, how's your salt intake? How are you doing with that? And I was kind of like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So that was my first experience into not understanding how to properly use electrolytes. So they gave me like a little Ziploc bag of little pills, salt
Mm-hmm.
tablets. So for the rest of the race, I was trying desperately to get caught up. So it was a very memorable experience because it was so painful. And the whole way, the second half of the race, practically, I was having these cramps, and they would sometimes go away, but then they would come back.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I just remember thinking this, oh, I just got to keep going. I got to press on. And by this time, I had read a lot of books about ultra marathon running, and I had read articles, and I felt like there was something that I was seeking because I had read these stories from people who talked about hitting the pain wall, the pain cave, and breaking through. And when they
Mm-hmm.
got to the other side, it was like this magical thing, and there were angels singing, and something that I was imagining was going to happen if I could feel this tremendous pain, if I can suffer, if I could then push through it. Man, what's that going to be like? So anyway, I was
Mm-hmm.
very motivated, even though this was terrible, and I knew that it was all for the greater good. And then I got to the finish line, ran really hard. The last couple of miles, I always finish my races hard. So I kind of ran hard into the finish line. I was overjoyed to see my parents at the finish line. They had surprised me to come watch the finish. And that was quite special for me. But then I sat down. My legs were hurting. Someone said, "Oh, let's get him some mustard." So somebody brought me some mustard to eat, and that helped my cramping. But boy, then they wanted like shortly after that, they're like, let's walk over there for whatever reason. Like, so I had to try to stand up. I could not walk for, I don't know, maybe a half an hour after that race. It
Yeah.
was it was so memorable. I remember posting on Facebook. Well, there's a few of us who ran the race, not necessarily together, but we were running the same race, and it was our first ultra marathon. And I just remember posting on Facebook this photo, like we are now ultra marathon runners. We are ultra runners. And I don't know, that was something very exciting for me. Like, oh, I really have achieved something. And I was very proud
Mm-hmm.
of that. I didn't necessarily think I was going to go beyond that either. I mean, it's like I had made the decision to do an ultra marathon. I trained for it. I suffered through it, and then I did it. And, that's kind of where I thought it might end at that point. But anyway, I remember it so vividly, as you can tell. I could go on and
Yeah,
on.
it's crazy because like at the time you think like it's good enough, right? And like how many people can say they're an ultra runner or that they've ran 32 miles or 50K. It's pretty crazy. And there's literally no need to go beyond for like your actual body. But and just overall fitness. But it's funny and it's kind of a weird way to look at it, but prior to running my first ultra, I had watched like your video. I saw videos about like Scott Jurek, Courtney, and then like David Goggins, and you see all these like um, different figures out there in the running world, and um, I just remember like running my first race and being like, "Oh, this is like nothing. This it's like let's do this maybe as like a checklist on the way." But
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of set myself up for disaster in my first race, is being like, well, these guys are doing this, so it can't be that hard. Obviously I was wrong.
Yeah.
But it's crazy to think of like how much harder that must be. And I kind of want to like, going into longer races, when did you start going beyond like the 50K distance?
Okay, so this time it didn't take just 1 year to go past the 50K, although I did try. That's right, I did try to. A friend of mine suggested I run 100 miles in March of 2016. So that was going to be like 5 months after my first
Mm-hmm.
50K. And so I thought, okay, yeah, let's do this. And but what I didn't, again, I didn't do things the right way. Um, I started to run just every day, and I was just going for it. Um, a friend of mine who was a trainer said, "Hey, you should be resting and taking breaks." I'm like, "I don't got time to rest. I got 100 miles coming up." Um, and I also didn't completely understand the importance of the right gear, and so I was running in these very minimal shoes. Um, Not that minimal shoes are bad. I was
Mm-hmm.
inspired by the Born to Run book to think about going barefoot if possible, right?
Yeah.
I bought Luna sandals, and I was quite interested in minimal shoes, and I ended up running a sort of a casual 50K with a local running group, and I wore these trail shoes, but they were very minimal trail shoes. They had hardly any cushion, and this particular 50K was on an old railroad trail, kind of like what you're talking about, but this one,
Mm-hmm.
instead of being gravel, was paved. So I ran a 50K on mostly paved in these minimal trail shoes. At the end of that, I ended up having an ankle that was a joint that was really messed up. It hurt a ton. I went to the doctor, they x-rayed it. They're like, "Oh yeah, your joint's in terrible shape." But anyway, so I injured myself to the point where I had to take quite like 6 months off to get myself healed. And that, so in short, that 100 miler in March never happened. So that taught me about the importance of going slow and building slow and wearing the right gear. Um, and so that's what brought me to, and finally running my first. Well, I ran 100K in 2018. So finally in 2016, I was able to run again. So I started to do more 50Ks. So in the same way that I wanted to get good at the half marathon, I also decided I wanted to get good and comfortable with the 50K distance. So I ran quite
Mm-hmm.
a few 50Ks. And somewhere along the way, I don't know when, but maybe in 2016 sometime, I started to hear about the longer distances, like the 200 milers. I started just to
Mm-hmm.
see through social media just the idea that that existed. And I'm not saying that even necessarily it appealed to me yet, but I just started to become aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
After I did the 100K, and again, my parents came to that. That was cool because it was they wanted to see me finish that race, and I did pretty well. And then I think it was in 2018 that I started to make the decision that I wanted to go for 100 miles, and so yeah, I signed up to do my first 100 miler, which I did in September of 2009. Nope, that's not true. 2018 is when I did September 2018. I did my first 100 miler, and
Mm-hmm.
so I did the 100K sort of along the way. It was a long training run in service of that 100 miler. That's right. Um, yeah, so it wasn't very long before I started to go. I got bigger and bigger. The I told you that I had this idea that I had read about people breaking through and having this very emotional, spiritual experience almost at the finish line
Hmm.
or somewhere along the way. I started to discover that these 50Ks weren't giving me that. I'd run a bunch of 50Ks and they were hard and I had fun or whatever, but I wasn't having this emotional release that I was expecting. And I
Yeah.
thought, I started to think, well, maybe I just need to go farther. I haven't gone hard enough yet. So I did the 100K on the way to 100 miles. I was so excited to do the 100 miler. That was really epic. And I think there's a different sort of vibe there's something about a race that's going to take most people more than a day to complete that just seems to slow everything down or just sort of bring a different vibe. You go to a 5K or a 10K or even a half marathon, I think they probably set up the race that morning and you guys are going
Hmm.
to do all the thing. And then by the evening, it's going to all be torn down and everyone's going to be back home. It's such a short, compressed thing. Where my first 100 miler, the night before, there was um, like dinner served and there was like vendors and tents and there was come here and meet all of the other runners and look at the map. It felt like an event even before the race started. So the night
Hmm.
before we had this whole long big party almost. It was in some meeting other people. The next morning the race finally started, and of course the next morning after that I finished my race. Yeah, it was just there was something about it that just felt more communal. It was really a
Hmm.
special experience to be a part of it. It was the Mountain Lakes 100 in Oregon, which was my first 100 miler. It's put on by Go Beyond Racing. It's a fantastic race. I loved it. I met some cool other runners. Some of the runners I met at that race, I'm still good friends with. And I finished that race in under 24 hours. I can't remember the exact time, 23 hours and 20 minutes or something, maybe.
Hmm.
But I finished it. I was elated. My parents were there to watch me finish another big race. My daughter was there. And but yet at the same time I didn't have that emotional breakthrough that I was still hoping for, but I did have a sense that when the sun came up, that is, of the morning I was finishing, I did start to have this feeling of disappointment, almost of, I had there was a lot of hard things that happened in there, but overall I want more. I don't want to stop after one night is the start of the feeling that I had that day. Um, and so I think that's what I started to think, okay, this 200-mile thing that I started thinking about, I'm starting to think more about it. And so I think it must have been January 1st of 2019. So just a few months after I finished my first 100 miler, on January 1st is when Moab 240, the registration opened up on the website. So that's when I signed up for my first 200-mile race, which was scheduled for October of 2019. Yeah. So
That's
that's kind of how that's sort of a little bit of the abbreviated journey of where I started to tee up the next big distance, I guess.
yeah. I guess that probably in between there, there's probably a lot of small injuries and pains and trial and error with gear. But
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of yeah, I'm really glad you say trial and error with gear. That was something that I spent a lot of time thinking about and focusing on. But um, but yeah, there was in between there's lots of different races,
mhm.
and lots of different long training runs, but also there was a lot of training. The
Yeah.
amount of training that I did, unsexy, just getting out there, putting in the miles, that's that's the big commitment.
Hmm.
The people often are surprised when they learn about how much it costs to enter a 200-mile race, for example. The entry fees are very high because
Hmm.
it's a fairly small audience, but there's also airplane flights and hotels and incredible amounts of shoes, all this gear you buy. But the cost of the race pales in comparison to the amount of time and expense you spend in a year or 2 years running 4 or 5 days a week. And
Hmm.
um, that's where the hard work is. The hard work is in building up. That's where it takes dedication and commitment. Because any one of those days, you could be like, you know what, I'm not into it today. Um, and I certainly have had a few days where I said I'm not into it, but more than often than not, I've gotten out there to continue the work. But that's where the toughness comes in. The
Hmm.
whatever it takes to finish the race or the actual race day, that's just dessert. That's when you get to celebrate everything that you've done until then. And but anyway, yeah, there's a lot happened between 100 miles and 200 miles, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's I was thinking about that the other day, because somebody told me, like, not the other day, it's probably like several months ago actually, but somebody was talking about how you're spending $170 to run, like you're paying to run, and I was like,
Yeah,
there's much more expensive races out there than this one, but I was like, the real cost is when you're training for an ultra, you're putting in a lot of like, well, I do a lot of slow miles, but it's a lot of miles. It wears out the shoes. You need to have
yeah,
more than one pair of shoes. But then I'm also like, I do a lot of cross training and other sports, and so you have shoes for those sports. You have different equipment for those as well
that's
because
right.
it's all necessary to keep your body functioning. And I'm definitely learning that right now, with some different injuries that I've been going through. But it is, the main price is outside of the race,
That's
well,
absolutely right.
100%. And I think the biggest joy for me comes from the training, actually. Um, and I love the training piece of this and getting ready for races, excuse me, or different athletic pursuits. But I love the grind, and I'm sure a hardworking guy like yourself, and you have like that grit we talked about earlier. I'm sure you have to love that as well.
I don't hate it. I mean, there are
Yeah,
times where it's,
yeah.
you don't always love it, but I there's a big part of me that is motivated by the difficulty of making it all work and figuring out the scheduling. And this morning, for example, I had a busy day of work. But before that, I needed to. My daughter was leaving to go to college, and she was going to be leaving at 6:45 a.m. to drive away. And so but I still had to get my run in. And so that meant I had to be starting my run by 5:30. So that meant I had to get up at 4. So, back timing everything to like, okay, so this week, every morning I've woken up between 4 and 4:30 to get my run done. And yeah, that's just sort of, par for the course these days, but it's enormous amount of dedication, I feel like. but
Hmm.
I but it but you are right, you have to enjoy it at some point. You can't
Yeah.
decide you're going to do a task that you absolutely hate and expect that you're going to get out there every morning at 4 a.m. to do the thing you hate, and be successful. So I do enjoy the training, and of course I try to make the unsexy stuff fun as much as I can too. So
Hmm.
I have a couple of parks that I go to. I go to one park for the easy days. I go to another park for the more interesting, harder, or longer days. If I have time on a long weekend, I'll try to go to a destination of places where, it's a place I haven't been, or it's got an amazing mountain view, or just make it, desirable for me to go to all that hard work. So yeah, there's little games I play to make sure that even when it's a tough one, that at least I'm still having fun because I want to feel rewarded by that
Yeah,
too. So
for
yeah.
sure. You alluded to in your first 100 miler that you wanted to see that second sunlight or second sunrise. Um, What was it like experiencing that for the first time?
Experiencing the seeing more than one sunrise.
Yeah, that's bonkers to me. Um, and I've seen it in your videos, but that's such a outsider's point of view and
Yeah.
perspective.
Well, I think most people who run 100 miles or any race that takes them through the night, into a sunrise, I think most people agree that the sunrise is a really energizing time. You get a lot of, you might be just going through the night and exhausted and just dead to the world. The sun comes up and people start to wake up, and like, oh, it really provides a lot of energy. Um, So yeah, so the first time that I ran through multiple sunrises would have been in Moab 240 in 2019. The race actually started before sunrise, so I saw my first sunrise an hour or so into the race. Um, the second sunrise would have been like about mile 80 something, 85 ish. I don't remember exactly. And I can remember that second sunrise being just such a blessing. It had been a very cold night. Like I think it actually got down to 17 degrees that night. I was
Oh wow.
freezing. I was so cold. And the sun started to come up, and I was so excited to see the sun again, and so excited to feel the warmth it was going to give me once it got just a little bit higher above the mesas around Moab. Because at that particular part of the race, I was down below some cliffs, so even though the sun was
Mhm.
coming up, I was still in its shadow. uh yeah, it was a thrill to see that sunrise. And then there would be another one. And then there'd be, I think there was, after that there were two more sunrises. It's kind of mind-blowing
Yeah.
what the scope of that is when you're talking about that, that kind of time frame.
It's crazy. And the other thing that part of me that thinks is like the crazy part is the logistics as well. You're being supported, and the race is there's people organizing this race for 4 days and 5 days with like check-in and whatnot. And I don't know how much longer they keep it open past the 4 days you were in it, but that's bonkers. Once
Yeah.
again, did you end up feeling that sense of like elation at the finish line?
um I felt really good when I crossed the finish
Mhm.
line. So at Moab 240 in 2019, I think my finish time was, oh, was it 100 hours if I remember
Mhm.
right? And so just over 4 days. It was like 4 days plus 4 hours. This is when I
Mhm.
finished. And normally I could remember I would cross finish lines, and I would, I'd cross the finish line, I'd feel great, but I wouldn't necessarily do anything, I don't know, showy, I guess. I don't know what the
Mhm.
right word would be. My celebrations were probably a bit inside, but when I crossed the finish line, I, like, for the first time, like, put my hands above my head in a move that felt very celebratory, and also felt very proud of myself,
Mhm.
and congratulating myself. So, but it wasn't necessarily the emotional breakthrough that I thought I was going to feel. But
Mhm.
I think I might have written it up in a race report. But what I decided was I ended up feeling the feeling that I wanted, but it wasn't a thing that was burst upon me, or that I had to, that I would suddenly feel after having broken through. It was more of a realization after the fact. After I finished Moab, and I was sort of just reflecting upon what had happened, because it was, my Moab experience wasn't what I expected it to be. I mean, I don't know that anybody's first 200 or any 200 goes the way you expect it to be. I mean, certainly your first
Mhm.
one, you don't even know what to expect. But at mile 75 of that race, I was at an aid station and talking to the aid station captain, and he was like, "Man, you're doing great. You're on track to do like 72-hour finish or something." And I'm like, "Wow, really?" He's like, "Oh yeah, you're doing great." Then fast forward to just a little while later, like the next night, I'm at mile 120. I had just climbed the top of this crazy hill. I took a nap, and when I woke up, my hamstring was hurting me like terribly. Um, I ended up straining something along this one climb up to the mile 128 station, and it strained my hamstring. And the rest of the race, basically, I couldn't run, or at least that first the day or two after that, I couldn't run. I could
Mm.
walk. I could really, like, I could power hike really great. I was even doing 16-minute miles, but the minute I tried to run, it hurt too bad. So I suddenly found myself having to deal with this this adversity that I didn't expect. I had an injury. It wasn't an injury that was going to take me out of the race, but it was an injury that was going to slow me down and it was going to cause me more pain than I had budgeted for. Um, and so I didn't finish in the 72 hours that my friend had promised me. Instead, I finished 100 hours. But it was the idea that even though I had gotten hurt and I powered through, by the fourth day or the last day before I started hitting, I did start to be able to shuffle a bit more. My body was healing in the middle of this race. That I had injured on one day of the race, and a couple of days later, I was starting to feel a little bit better. So when I was reflecting upon the whole experience, I just started to see that from the higher altitude view or whatever, like, oh, bigger picture, like, I can't believe this. I ran this thing. I got injured. I got better all in the course of one race. And, I realized that outside of any major injury, like there are injuries that happen on the course that you can't continue from. You break something. Well, I guess some runners keep going, but I can imagine you can get an injury that will take you out.
Yeah.
Barring that, I started to realize that we humans are capable of almost anything. Like we could go there's no limit to how far we can go if we are taking good care of ourselves with the right hydration and the right fueling and the right sleep strategy. There are things you still have to do it. But that was my aha moment, like, oh my God, we are so amazing creatures. And I am amazing as a member of the species, being able to do this. That was like the thing that I finally caught it. It wasn't, like I said, an aha moment at the finish line, a feeling of angels on me. No, it was a later, just thinking about the whole thing and then realizing really what we had accomplished. Yeah, it was cool.
That's incredible. And this ultimately kind of, it leads to the question, and I've never asked it directly, but I think in your case, I would love to hear it. But why do you continue to run these races? And there's like an obvious sense of accomplishment that comes with doing something like this and pushing yourself. But in your words, why do you continue to run these crazy races and pursue these goals when you've proved to yourself that you can do it?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's funny. There's so many reasons why I do it now. Some of them are just to the side, like, as you met me through YouTube, so I make videos of these races, and it's a great joy for me to share the experience with other people. I don't necessarily set out to inspire anybody. I just set out to share the experience, and people tell me that they are inspired by seeing it, and that's cool. I think that's really wonderful. But that's not necessarily why I still continue to go out and do it, because the challenge of the 200-mile distance and the 250, it's so big that it's you have to sort of have, I think, a deeper reason besides just some practical thing of, oh, I want to share the experience with my friends. That feeling of being able to push past adversity or push through adversity, it doesn't, I don't think it gets old necessarily. I mean, I had that experience at Moab the first time of things didn't go right or as planned. We adjusted, and we still were able to finish the race and be successful. I wanted to just have that feeling again. It's an amazing feeling of I don't know if power, that's not the right word, but the runner's high that my mom talked about that I never really understood when I was younger. I think that is something that I am much more in touch with now, because while I don't necessarily get the runner's high after day one, I might have the runner's high on day two. Certainly I had the runner's high on day three. If you watch my Cocodona video, actually both Cocodona videos, day three, I'm running through Sedona and I'm almost running like it's day one, like I'm on fresh legs somehow. I don't even know how that happens. Um, and then day 4, there might be a little bit of runner's high, but there's something about it that feels so good because I know that when I go back home a couple of days later, I am not on the runner's high anymore. I'm feeling sad. I
Mm-hmm.
miss it. And so part of it is it's to get that feeling of this is the place I want to be. I love this feeling. I love pushing myself. Um, there's so many aspects of a 200 that are bigger than the physical activity, at least for me. I mentioned earlier that there's a community aspect that I discovered when I started at the 100-mile distance. The community in a 200, I feel like, puts the 100 milers into a different category. The 200 community, it's all about community.
Mm-hmm.
We're all there to support each other, and you're in the course of a 100-mile race or any race, you often meet other runners. You might have matched their pace, and you may chalk for a little bit. In a 200-mile race, that happens a lot too. But what's different is that you talk to them on day 1 a little bit, and then maybe you run into them again later on day 2, and later you run into them at the end of day 4 or something. It's just you keep seeing people depending on how your pace is, and to see that level of I guess support for each other, because you're like, oh hey John, when I saw you yesterday, your legs were really hurting. How are you feeling today?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's a whole just a whole nother level. So I love the community aspect. I love being a part of that. I love challenging myself. Um, I'm sorry. This might be the most muddied why I do it answer on your show.
Oh, it's the first one, so it's
Yeah.
the best.
Yeah,
Uh,
great. I love to hear
Also the worst, but that's besides the
it.
point.
That's right.
Um, no, it's I think it's a perfect answer. It's I think you find a beauty in the friendship and the power of pushing through.
Yeah.
Um, and
And I'm
that's
just and
some
I'm constantly surprised with how well our bodies perform.
yeah.
So this year, I am, if it all goes well, I will have run 4 200-mile races. And so in May, I ran Cocodona 250. In June, I ran Tahoe 200. In August, I ran the Bigfoot 200. And in October, at 1 month from now, I'm scheduled to run Moab 240. So it'll be my second time at Moab. And this is before this year started, I had completed 200 milers. And so I've definitely like upped the ante for me, because
Mm-hmm.
I decided that I was going to do the Triple Crown, which is the Destination Trails series of Tahoe, Bigfoot, and Moab, and then I added Cocodona onto that. And what has really, I think, shocked me, I don't think I expected this to happen. I have felt stronger at each 200. So Cocodona went pretty well, but then I did Tahoe, and Tahoe was actually much more difficult for me to finish because I was having respiratory problems. But if it hadn't been for that, I would have been even stronger. But
Mm-hmm.
Tahoe was my hardest finish mentally to decide that I was going to continue on, even though I couldn't breathe. Then I got to Bigfoot, and Bigfoot is the most difficult of the 3 destination trail courses. And and I felt like, even though there were some times during that race where I was absolutely miserable, I hated it, I was angry about everything. Um, I finished it the most strong I have finished any of my 200s. I ran those last 12 miles on the road, almost at normal road running pace. I was 11-minute miles for some of that, just feeling natural and easy. And so I'm so impressed with what the body can do, that it's
Mm-hmm.
fun, and it's getting fun in a way to like keep pushing. It's like, oh my, let's see what this body can do now. This is amazing.
It is incredible. I I'm a fan of all athletics. Um, and I don't watch sports or anything like that, but I train CrossFit, I train jiu-jitsu, I run a lot. Getting into swimming. I'm a cycling fan. I think it's incredible to see how the body moves and
Mm-hmm.
how it able to adapt, and hearing how you can be injured in one race. And granted it's over a long period of time of multiple days, but you're still moving that whole time, and
Yeah.
but you're still healing, and that's so cool
It's,
to
right.
so cool to see and you're not and hear.
Yeah.
Um, and looking back on it, you have to have so much pride in that.
Yeah. I really do. Uh, and I think about the physical challenge and overcoming it, but I also think about how it relates to a broader idea of life throwing you challenges and how do you
Hmm.
deal with it? How can you keep moving when things aren't going the way you plan? And so I try to think about how the lessons that ultra running is teaching me, has taught me, and continues to teach me aren't just running lessons. They're really lessons for how I can lead my life. And sometimes when you get injured, you just need to slow down. It doesn't mean you have to stop, but you just maybe just need to change your pace a bit or change the way that you're moving. Um,
Hmm.
but I do look back on it, and all the various times when there's been something about it that was extremely challenging, and anybody would have said, "Oh, I totally understand why you dropped out of the race because that hurt really bad on your hamstring, and you couldn't breathe. I understand why you would have quit." But um, by by being able to not quit, by pushing through and getting to that finish, even if the finish takes longer than the plan or than the hope, there's still such a sense of accomplishment to know that there was an adversity that we managed, or that maybe we manage isn't the right word, maybe, but we managed ourselves to overcome the adversity.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm very, it gives me a lot of self pride and self worth, and in some ways to do these. Maybe that's another reason why I do it, is because this is the thing that tells me that I am good at something and really worth something. And so when there isn't a race to do, the voices in my head start to take over, and they're not quite as nice.
Hmm.
So these races remind me of I guess what a blessing I am.
Yeah, I think that's a great mindset, and just to be able to know you're able to know the thing that can, or you've identified the thing that brings you joy, that brings you self worth, and you can actively work towards that every day. And if you go for that run tomorrow morning, unless tomorrow's a rest day, if you go for that run tomorrow morning, um, you know you're working towards the thing that gives you worth, and it's going to make you more positive, and it's going to brighten your day, and it's going to get those positive endorphins early in the morning, and it's going to lead to a better day. It's going to lead to a better work day. You're going to be happier when you talk to your kids, and it's a good thing. Um, and I do believe that running is one of the best ways to reach those the highest levels of those positive endorphins. Um, and I haven't done the extremes of all these other sports, but I've done other activities for long endurance. But running has to. There's something about it. I think that's just primal. That just
Yeah.
feels good.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've tried lots of different sports, especially when I was injured
Hmm.
back in 2016. Nothing brought me the enjoyment or the endorphins. Nothing felt quite as good as
Hmm.
when I was back on my feet running again.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I asked you for an hour, and we're an hour and a half now, but I don't want to keep you up for the whole night. I just want to say I appreciate you coming on the podcast, and I think this is a solid way to kind of wrap it up. But if you want to share anything about your channel, your Instagram, anything like that that you would like to, go ahead and do that here.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Ty. Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me on the show. If people want to see more, learn more, wesplate.com is a website that I try to just have my running history there, links to my YouTube and my Instagram. So that's sort of a great place to get started. You could see how long did it take me to finish these races, or also links to the various videos. If you search for Wes Plate on YouTube, you'll find my channel. Also, if you don't want to go to wesplate.com, my handle on Instagram is midpack elite, and of course it's also linked from wesplate.com. So yeah, I try to make videos of all the big races that I do. I'm currently trying to finish up my video for the Bigfoot 200, which I ran last month. And so yeah, there's lots of good content there, and try to also share great photos on Instagram. But yeah, thanks a lot for having me on the show. I'm really glad you reached out. It's great to speak with you. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
No, I really enjoyed it. I love these videos. And I've explained in other episodes, but the reason I do it is because for my research, my thesis, and my graduate work, I had to interview people on why they teach and why they coach and what was the reason they did that, and why do they keep doing it. And meanwhile, it was COVID, and I was starting to get into running and longer running. I was like, oh, let's see how many miles I can run this month. And I had started listening to podcasts because music gets old. Podcasts and audiobooks are like what I run to.
Yeah, me too.
Um, and I was like, I think I would really enjoy that. It seems very similar process to my grad school
Mm,
interviews. And so finally I just started it this past May, and I I'm fascinated with ultra running. And so I'm gonna have more and more on, and I
good.
appreciate you coming on, and I'll send you the links and everything like that
Please do.
to your email. But I appreciate you coming on, and it means so much.
Yeah. Well, thanks
But
a lot for the opportunity. It's great to speak with you.
absolutely, you have a great rest of your night here.
All
Thank you.
right. Thanks,
All
Ty.
right.
Bye
See ya.
bye.
Thank you guys for joining me on another edition of the What's Your Why podcast. I'm very appreciative for Wes coming on. And as I said in the intro, it was kind of a fanboy experience for me to have him come on. And I really appreciate it. It's inspiring to hear the stories of how different people approach exercise, whether it's just from a health standpoint of prolonging their life, or somebody like Wes who's pushing the boundaries of what fitness can actually be. So keep tuning in. I'm going to be doing more episodes on fitness and kind of why people are seeking the path of fitness and how they are going about doing it. And I'm excited to have a few more people on that are going to be another fanboy moment for me. So keep tuning in. If you like it, share it. I appreciate you guys' time. Thank you.